So now we're on to basic color correction and grading. We're going to start off with Lumetri global effects. What does that mean? Well, Lumetri is the color correction engine inside Premiere Pro. Engine, tool, whatever you'd like to call it. But Lumetri Color is what we use in Premiere Pro. And what we're going to be dealing with in this chapter is basic exposure correction and white balance correction. We'll then progress through this chapter with other things that you can do with regards to the color correction and color grading. So first and foremost, I've selected this clip to make some changes to. Looking at it, let's get it away from the black bars that we've put in. I'm going to hold down Alt and click and drag while still holding down Alt and let go of my mouse button, and we've made a duplicate of this. We've done that with other things so far, but just to repeat, it's a really easy way to duplicate what you need. You can copy and paste like you would do in Word, but this is by far the easiest way to duplicate anything in Premiere Pro. I was thinking because you can do it in After Effects as well, and the whole Adobe suite really, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, everything. So now we've got this clip just on its own. Just going to zoom into here, and just a reminder, this is the clip where Emma's trying to get the pizza to slide off the peel. So we're just going to stop here at one frame in this clip, and what we need to do is we need to change our workspace. We are currently in Adobe editing. That's the workspace we set up with everything that we need for general editing. We now need to deep dive into one certain element, and that is color. So here it is up here, color. It's the American US English spelling because it's an American program. It doesn't offend me too much. I'd love to have a UK version, but yeah, we'll click on to color, and now we're greeted with a different workspace. As you can see, the project area has been moved down to here. We have these history and markers and all the different things that we deleted from the previous workspace in editing, but it doesn't really bother me because I don't really access this down here. In fact, I could get rid of it. I'm just going to. So just a reminder, when you want to make any changes with regards to your workspace, you right click whatever you don't want and close panel. I'm going to continue doing that with the rest of these just to get rid of them because I really don't use them. I've got my selection tools down here. If I need them, I probably won't, although yeah, sometimes you do, maybe with the pen tool. We'll deal with that a little bit later on. And we have our effects controls, which isn't necessarily that important. What we do want is the Lumetri scopes. Let me very briefly explain to you what we're seeing here. If you see this, that looks very similar to maybe this shape. Now what this is doing is it's not showing you this image, although this is a little bit taller than this is, but what this is doing is it's measuring from 0 to 100, which is black, through to white, and all the different colors. As you can see, there's red, green and blue, RGB making up all the colors of the color spectrum. And what we have here, down here, are certain areas which are closer to black, so close to the shadows and complete blackness, and up here all the way up to white. And as you can see up here, this is very similar to the waveform. Do you remember we were looking at the waveform before? And we were looking at, let me just get up a waveform, and you can see how 0 is right in the middle because we're in a stereo pair. But even if this was mono, we just have one of these taking up the whole. But whereas this is 0 right the way through the middle, and then it's maximum on the edges in the Lumetri scope. If I click back that clip, 0 is here, and 100, or all the way up, is right up here. So if we apply the same thoughts from a waveform, where has that gone? As a waveform to the Lumetri scopes, what we can see is that there's certain parts right in the middle of this image that are almost clipped. Just like in sound, we say that it's clipping or peaking. In colour, we say that we're clipping. And as you can see, certain parts of this, greens and some reds are, you see how there's a red tinge here, are clipped. Now if we look across, what I'm assuming these bits of green will relate to are the leaves of basil on the actual pizza. Reason why I think that is because this one here is not only green, but it's really quite light or bright, and that will be affecting that. If we scrub through a little, you can see that these things change, and actually that stays, that doesn't move to the left or right. So it's quite possibly this behind it, this plant behind. If we scrub a little bit further, it doesn't move, whereas these bits of green are moving, which are no doubt the leaves of basil. It's funny how they're very similar in shade. It's not really, it's not that funny at all. It's green. Also you can see parts of green here that are kind of washing through, and that's no doubt this line of green we have here. So this is a great example actually how to explain this Lumetri scope. There are certain different types of Lumetri scope, but this is the one that we're looking at right now, which is the waveform RGB. We also have a parade which splits the red, the green and the blue into different sections, so you can see, but let's just get rid of the parade for now. Also you can see this blue here, so let's take a little bit of time and look through this image and see what we're seeing. So there's this blue here, and it's not 100, so it's not really bright. It's also not 0, so it's not really dark. I would imagine that this blue here not only means this, in fact I would say that that definitely means that, because that's a definite blue. However, we have a little bit of bluishness, definitely not a word, here as well, which is quite possibly this here, which is actually an outdoor rug. Never knew such a thing existed, but my wife introduced me to an outdoor rug last year. Looking further, we have this little bit of purple here, and I would imagine this is somewhere in the bluey reds here, because obviously purple is made up of blue and red. And as you can see as we're moving through, we have a spike here of white. I'm imagining that is the watch strap for my wife's Fitbit. If we move it back and forth, that kind of works with her movement as well. I'm looking here now as I move back and forth, and yeah, that makes sense. And of course the white here and the white here are the plate right here, and a lot of the whites through here, although they're not bright, they are reflective, and that's no doubt the pizza peel, but also parts of the mozzarella. It's amazing what you can see once you understand the waveform RGB and can see and read it. There's even parts of the yellow here which are quite bright, and they're probably, well, they're no doubt definitely adding to the blue and green here, because blue and green together make yellow. That's understanding this. Now let's do a little bit of basic exposure and white balance correction, because as I said, you can see that some of this is actually clipped. Now in videography, quite often it's a balance between what you want to keep and what you are willing to lose when it comes to exposure. The amount of times where you're in on a shoot and it's a very bright sky behind you, and if you expose for the sky, so say we wanted to expose for this sky in the shoot, and we wanted that to maybe show all the details of the cloud that was over. It was a little bit overcast this day, and you wanted to show all the details of that, then you'd bring all the exposure down. I'm gonna try and do it a little bit in here to kind of show you. I don't really think it'll show that much, because this isn't raw video, and by raw video I mean video of a quality that's captured by a £4,000 or £5,000 camera. We don't have the color the color capture in a £2,000 camera, which is what was used in this. It's all about color space, and we're on 422 rather than 444. But if I bring down exposure, we're still not getting any details back here, and that's because you see how this line is staying. That means it's clipped. Don't forget, anything in this, if you want to get it back to 0, double click the slider and it brings it back up to the default of 00000. What I mean by this is the fact that we've blown out, the effect is you've blown out the whites, and quite often on a shoot you need to be ready to sacrifice certain things to be able to keep everything else that you want reasonably exposed, and by exposed I mean lit. If I'd exposed for up here and to bring in and to keep in all these shadows, I would have brought down the exposure to allow for the brightness, but bringing down the exposure to allow for the brightness in the sky would have meant that this would be super underexposed, and it's that battle, and that's what I've done here. I've exposed for the subject, which is this, which as you can see is well exposed. You can see it all. It's well lit. You've got all the colors going all the way through it and the lightness, but we have lost the sky. But in all honesty, are you really looking at the sky? Are you even looking at the trampoline that my neighbors have next door? You're not. You're looking at this subject here. So this is what we're paying attention to, and what we want to make sure that the exposure and the white balance is correct for. Now, the white balance also is something that you can maybe tweak a little bit, but again, it depends on the quality of the footage that you have. If you're shooting raw video, which again, not only is from a very expensive camera, it's an extremely large file size, and a lot of computers struggle with it. But if you were shooting with very, very expensive footage, which this isn't, you would be able to change a lot of the colors and a lot of the white balance and still keep the quality. The problem is, once you start playing around with colors in video, it can do what is referred to in the industry as the picture can fall apart. Let me show you an example of the picture falling apart. I can see that the shadows aren't anywhere near, so let me bring those shadows down. Forget about the warmth. We're adding warmth here because we're bringing down all the shadows. So that's all the shadows within all of the colors. But if I bring down the blacks, you see how, if you look in my wife's top here, you can see how if I tilt it to make it bigger, you can see how we're now bringing in a lot of noise. This doesn't look natural at all. It's not a nice gradient through the color. And again, this is a common fight that all videographers and editors have. But as you can see, this doesn't look anywhere near as good quality as a Control Z, do it again, as good quality as that. This looks relatively flat, but it looks much better quality, and that's because the image isn't falling apart. So let's just do some basics within what we can do with this footage without it falling apart. Well, first and foremost, it is a little bit overexposed, but I don't want to bring down the exposure because everything here is okay for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring down the highlights. So the highlights are all the way at the top here. I'm going to bring down the highlights just a smidge, and you see how everything comes down because this is what's called a global edit, and this deals with everything in the image. You can highlight certain areas, and we'll do that in a later section, but this is a global edit. We're affecting all of the image. So I'm going to bring down those highlights just a little bit more. And one lovely little tip is, if you've got to that point, I don't really want to bring it any further down. We're at minus 18.2 now. If I bring it any further down, you start to have effects with the color that they just don't really look good. It just doesn't look good. Again, this is all personal preference, and it's your own eye, which is what all of this is. You're making, without sounding too cliche, you're making art, and it's your interpretation. But my interpretation is, I don't like that. Bear in mind that things will look different on different monitors depending on if it's calibrated or if it's not. I'm on a fully calibrated monitor, which shows me true color, and the beauty of that is that I have the correct starting position, because you can, all of your videos that you ever create will be watched on a variety of different monitors, whether it be a TV that's 24-inch or 58, 65, 75 inches, which will all have different color spaces. You could also be showing on your phone or someone's phone, and the time of day will affect because it will depend what brightness their phone is set at, whether they have the blue light filter taken out, so all the blues will be out. So whereas with that in mind, say this is your video and you're showing this. If I go to pay no attention to this at the moment, but say someone's got the blue light filter on, and that means that the blues are reduced. Doesn't really make much of a difference in this image because we don't have much blue. But if I go for hue versus hue as well, and maybe it affects the blue in a way of it warms up the blues, all of a sudden, and I know that doesn't look like much, but if you look here, right here, these sticks, which are to do with my next door neighbor's trampoline, if I take off that effect, those are blue, but I've changed that blue to red. Now imagine if something was majorly blue in your shoot, and then someone's watching it on an edit on a phone that's got the blue light filter turned off. That can make a big difference, like a huge difference. Let's pretend blue is red, and let's apply that to this, because we've got quite a lot of red and orange. If we brought down the red, I mean, that's desaturated a lot. You may not be able to tell, but it really has. And if we take down the red and recolor it for something, all of a sudden your red source has gone, well, it's on its way to green. I mean, that's a subtle. It's not necessarily. I can't even quite see possibly real green, but I mean, let's say it goes all the way. In fact, let's color pick to show you that color there. So that's orange, and maybe someone's watching on a device which oranges show as yellow. Well, we're halfway to green now, and all of a sudden your orange looks yellow. So this is something to bear in mind with regards to your colors, because you want your colors as accurate as you can at the starting point. I've shown you extremes here, which are really to be taken with a pinch of salt, as it's a slice of that pizza. But yeah, I just wanted to explain that with regards to the different devices that someone may be watching your videos on, and to bear that in mind, because you want to get your colors as accurate as you can straight off the bat. So with that in mind, let's maybe see if we can get the white balance any better. I think I exposed for white balance, and I set my white balancing camera really quite accurately, but let's just double check. Right here, we have under white balance, we have WB selector, and we have what's called an eyedropper. What we can do with this is we can click it once, and then bring this. I'm not holding down, I've just clicked it once and I've selected this, and I need to find white. But I don't. What you want to find is kind of a grey. It's called 18% grey, and that's actually perfect white. This actually looks quite grey. It's not accurately grey, but let's select this and see what the rest of the picture does. So what I'm telling now is I'm telling Lumetri color, which as you can see, it's up here. I'm telling Lumetri color that this is white, and let's see what happens to the picture. Did you notice a change? Let me undo and redo, undo and redo. You can see actually there's a lot of warmth, or there's a little bit of warmth coming up here. We saw very little change, and the reason for that is the fact that I got white very accurate in the actual filming of this. I set my white balance really quite accurately. So that's quite a reassurance that you've done the right thing. I'm going to undo that because it doesn't really make a difference. So what else can we do to this picture with regards to basic exposure and white balance? Well, first and foremost, as I said before when we came back to this, it's a little bit flat. And what can help with flatness in an image is contrast. And under tone, we have contrast here. We've already taken the highlights down a little bit. If we add a little bit of contrast, let me take it all the way up so you can see. You see what it does? It makes a lot of the colours richer. It doesn't increase the saturation, but it makes them richer. Let me just get that off. See the difference? So I'm going to boost that contrast just a little bit. And what I would also do is you see how we're nowhere near 0. That means we're not really using the whole of the color gamut, G-A-M-U-T, a whole gamut, which is 0 to 100 or 0 to 225, depending on which side of the scale you're looking at. I prefer 0 to 100 because, well, it's just easier to see. There's a lot of science that goes into this, and that's not my forte, but I can make things look pretty. So what I want to do is I want to crush the shadows a bit, crush the blacks. And that's another terminology. You lift the highlights if you need to. We've actually crushed the highlights a little bit, and we're going to crush the shadows a little bit. What we're going to do is we're going to keep an eye on this. We're also going to keep an eye on the parade down here, or the waveform, and let's see how that affects both. Okay, so we're bringing them down. That's too far because the color looks too much, and the reason why that's affected the color is because it's bringing down the shadows within all of these colors as well. So let's bring those shadows a little bit back up so we're still representing this. Let's just double click again and see where we're at. Okay, so I want to bring it down just a little bit. So we're a little bit further down. We're not all the way down, but we've added quite a bit of change here to show us how much change we've made. Under this basic correction, you can toggle it on and off. So let's turn that off. That was the original. Turn that back on, and yeah, you can see a big difference in the image. If we, by the way, if we go to effects controls, it's added Lumetri color in here. Remember how we were adding other things like crop and stuff like that? The minute you come into color and you start to play, it adds Lumetri color in here. So turning this off is the same as turning off the effects here. Okay, just want to draw the line between the two. So if you're ever back in your editing workspace and you think, oh, I just want to double check what that Lumetri is doing, you go to effects controls on the clip you're using, and you can easily toggle on and off. You can also, if you don't need to go all the way up to the color, maybe you think, oh, actually I want to add a little bit more contrast, you can twirl these down, and all of a sudden you have here what you had over in the color space. So you can easily just, or maybe just add a bit more. That's a lot more contrast. Just a little bit more contrast in this bit without heading back over to the color. But let's head back over to the color because I want to play around again with this in this area. So as you can see, we've also got saturation at 100%. Although that's at 100%, it's only in the middle because you can boost your saturation by a further 100%, which I'm sure we'll all agree looks more like a Baz Luhrmann music video. If you don't know who Baz Luhrmann is, you need to look him up. He's done a lot of music videos. He also was the director for Romeo and Juliet, the film. A lot of colours, very, very rich colours. But yeah, that's not necessarily what we're looking for here. And it's funny, if you do start playing around with saturation and boost it, you can see where colours are which aren't necessarily clear when saturation is just set to normal. Look down underneath here. I noticed something when I pulled up that saturation. This looks a little bit, well, it's under here, so it's being shadowed and kind of browns. But if I boost the saturation, you can actually see that a lot of yellow comes here as well. So that's, I mean, it's good to see these things because you can see actually where the colors are. And if we go back to Lumetri scopes and we boost that saturation again, you can see that this starts to really separate out, and where there's a rich red, the reds come into play. Where there's a rich blue, the blues really come out. And this blue now I can see is actually this plate, and this is actually a blue plate, but it's a very, very subtle blue. It's nowhere near as much of a blue as this. Control Z, bring that out. But you don't want to, by the way, you don't want to stay in full saturation for too long, because once you bring it back, everything looks really flat. Let me redo that. Control Shift Z. So that was where we were at that point. If I undo that, all of a sudden it looks flat. But if I actually take off Lumetri color totally, that'll show you just how flat it was. Just to almost reassure you, you need to reassure yourself that no, it's not actually too bad, and it's not flat at all. I'm just seeing it very, very oversaturated, much like when we were retiming the music in a previous chapter, and the music that we came back to after we'd sped it up something crazy felt really slow. It's not, it's just in relation to where you were at before. That's why it's also quite good to step away from a video edit. When you get to a certain point, step away from it. Go and get a coffee or a tea or a water, or go for a little walk. Stay away for a good few minutes, maybe an hour, even a couple of hours, and then come back and see it with a fresh set of eyes, because you can start to be blind to a certain things within your video if you spend too much time away from it. So it's really important. That's why in a lot of editing houses you have a number of people all working on the same edit, but they'll only work on it one at a time. So then one person will do the work, and then someone else will come in with a fresh set of eyes and see what they're doing, but then think, oh yeah, okay, it needs this change and this change. And that's where collaboration in editing can really help, or it can hinder if you're used to editing yourself. I'd hate someone coming in to play with my edit, but hey, it's different strokes. So that's in your basic correction area. We are going to look in the creative section a little bit later, and the curves, maybe a little bit with the color wheels, and maybe a little bit with HSL secondary. We could also play with vignettes, but curves is really quite a powerful tool as well. But yeah, for now, that is the start of your basic color correction and grading. I think you'll agree, I think you'll be hard pushed not to agree, that with that being our starting point, although it feels like we've done more than you can actually see, but when I turn back on that Lumetri color, you could definitely agree that that's a much richer picture for us to be viewing. Let me play it through so you can see. In fact, I'm going to duplicate this. So I've got two versions of it now, and I'm going to turn off Lumetri color for this one. I'm going to play them one after the other, without and with. Let's have a look. I mean, it's night and day. At least for me, it's night and day, the difference. I hope that has shown you just a little bit of what we can do in our color space within Premiere Pro. And from now on, we're going to be building on that.